All right, I think we are at the 9:30 hour, so we're going to begin. All right, I'd like to call the meeting to order. I am Michael Alexander, Vice President of Commission, and I am sitting for President Alice Coomas, who is not with us today. I'd like to begin by calling for a motion and a second to approve the minutes of the regular commission meeting of November 8th. All right. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. All right. I would like to ask Dan Pippinger to give us the executive director's report in the absence of Curtis, who I understand is under the weather.
That's correct. Thank you, Commissioner. First, I'd just like to issue a warm welcome to our new employee group. They're in their orientation. I think it's one of their last sessions, and they're here today to observe commission for a little while. So welcome to the port and welcome to the commission meeting. I'd also like to acknowledge the safety champions. We have 4 of them this month. Just pointing out Jennifer Stacy, who works in our emergency program in public safety and security, was really instrumental in bike and pedestrian safety around our new rideshare plaza in the P1 parking garage, making sure that the traffic flow and pedestrians and bikes were safe. That was wonderful. Nathan Hart, who works in our general aviation facility, really uncovered I'll call it a communication gap between the FAA and local crane operators. This is specifically out in the Hillsborough area where there's a lot of tower cranes that go through an approval process by the FAA to be near the airfield. And his work there has the FAA reevaluating their boilerplate language and has really improved the coordination between the construction activity out there and the airfield for safety. And that's, I just wanted to point that out. That's a actually really big event. Jeff Chung from our electrical engineering team, who identified a safety problem in electrical panels in the Terminal Core project and helped with the design of eliminating that so that people won't be exposed to any live wires in the panels. So that's, we call it prevention through design, was a really initiative in our engineering team. And then finally, Philip Stacy, who's a leverman on the dredge, really bringing his experience and knowledge with other deckhands and other people at the dredge to really lend time to them, to teach them and help keep a safe operation. So just congratulations to all of them. And I think for our safety message today, we have Todd Staple, the Senior Manager of Marine Maintenance, who's going to come up and provide a safety message. Thank you, Todd.
Does it matter which one? No.
Well, I might tell you to move in the other one. Sorry.
Good morning. I'm Todd Staples, Senior Manager of Marine Maintenance. I'm accountable for marine maintenance employees' occupational safety and health. Today's safety message highlights our journey to zero injuries in marine maintenance. Marine maintenance is comprised of 22 employees with maintenance activities at the port, marine terminals, and associated properties. So marine maintenance combines the port's key safety and health program attributes with our safety management system leading indicators to elevate and continuously improve our employee safety and health. Key safety and health attributes are a committed and visible leadership. I think we see that here today. Employee safety is paramount and a guiding principle at the port. Engaged employee involvement, also very critical. Everyone is responsible for safety and contributes to our safety plans and goals. Safety management system indicators are learning from incident reporting and analysis of facts for prescribing corrective actions. This is a pretty intense program, I have to say. Hazard reporting to ensure issues are corrected, and tracking corrective action plan, closure of safety issues, tasks, and incidents. Unfortunately, this year we've had more injuries than in previous 3 years. Marine maintenance incurred 5 OSHA recordable injuries between February and August of this year. Prior to the first of those injuries, we celebrated a 0 recordable injuries for a year. Now we're working back to 0. Employee safety and health is a continuous improvement journey toward operational excellence. I continue to be engaged with my leadership and safety staff to support and enable successful completion of our fiscal year 24 safety plan. Advancing the awareness that safety is not just the absence of injuries, but also the presence of resilient defenses. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted.
Good. Okay.
Just a couple other things, Commissioners. I just wanted to announce our newest local shop and our retail pop-up program, which is really designed to help small businesses grow through brand awareness, experience, and traffic. And that is Aurochs Leather. They will open in the new terminal after we open it. They're a family-owned business, and they will be producing leather goods produced by both Latino American and Oaxacan artisans. And we're really pleased to have that program up and going, and we're hopeful for another entrant into that program here soon. We also had a great a program with Good Maps, which is a app-based technology to help people with audiovisual guidance of PDX for people, travelers with disabilities. And we're expanding that Good Map region now through the entire airport complex. And obviously we'll update it also as we open the terminal core, but we're really pleased with that. It's really helping people who have vision or hearing disabilities move through the airport well. And it was really comes out of our PDX Accessibility Committee, where we have a lot of community members who are helping give us guidance on that program. Also pleased to announce the two artists selected for the terminal redevelopment. They are Yoon-hee Choi and Sanford Biggers. Yoon-hee Choi is a locally based artist. She will be producing two 56-foot long and 11-foot high glass walls that will be her first commissioned public artwork. And it'll be visible from the concourse connector into the terminal and by the TSA security wait areas. They're going to be spectacular. And the large-scale works will be developed from her mixed media collages. Sanford Biggers, who's nationally known, has two large-scale artworks that are going to be suspended from the ceiling near the entries to the concourse connector, and also where travelers exit the TSA security checkpoint. This is his first commissioned public artwork in the Pacific Northwest, and we're looking forward to that as well. Two other quick notes. We're happy to announce that we will be getting nonstop service from Portland to Nashville on Alaska Airlines in March. That'll be our first nonstop service to Nashville, and I think that's an important market for us, so we're very pleased with that. And then lastly, it's with regret that this is Stan Waters' last commission meeting. Stan's been here 15 years at the port and originally came to us in 2008 to really build this headquarters building and the parking garage. But he's focused the whole organization on safety and our safety culture. But I also want to, mention a couple other things. Stan, we were talking last night, he's done these foundational things at the port that are really going to have a lasting impact. And not just our safety program, but our capital project guidance and governance program has really matured with Stan. The resilience program, which you'll hear about a little bit later, Stan is the godfather of the resilience program, the grandfather of the resilience program. And then also his work with the navigation team and with the Army Corps of Engineers, really solidifying how the dredge works, how it's financed, and really, these are really foundational pieces that will be a legacy to Stan long after his departure, and we wish him the best in retirement. Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you, Dan. Any questions or comments from commission? All right, before I call for a vote, I do want to amplify our thanks to you, Stan. You will leave fingerprints here that will really speak to your contribution over those 15 years, so we thank you. Okay. All right, I would call for a vote to accept the executive director's report. All those in favor say aye. Opposed? All right, thank you very much. All right, we will move on to public comments. I understand that written comments were received by Jim Lobisher, Blaine Ackley, Scott Cheesewright, and Dale Felk. I hope I've pronounced names correctly. In addition, we have individuals who will offer comments either virtually or in person. Steve Mahler, Jim Lobisher, Mickey Barnes, Blaine Ackley, Dale Felk. Is there anyone else who has signed up? All right. So with those, I would like to move in the order of Steve Mahler, who I understand is here in person. Steve, I invite you up. And Steve will be followed by Jim Lobisher, who will offer testimony virtually. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, commissioners and guests, and thank you, Dan, for the plug for the national flight. So we're excited about that. So hopefully we'll see all of you on it. My name is Stephen Mahler. I'm the elected local executive council president of the Association of Flight Attendants, CWA, Council 39 in Portland. I work with and represent over 750 Alaska Airlines flight attendants based here at PDX. And I've been a flight attendant at Alaska Airlines for over 18 years, almost all of that time here at the Portland base. Last month, you met our Vice President, Crystal Berry. She was here and she gave you some information telling you that we've been in contract negotiations with Alaska Airlines management since September of last year on a contract impacting almost 7,000 flight attendants at Alaska system-wide. And that contract has not been fully renegotiated since 2014. Almost 10 years. Those negotiations became contentious in the spring of this year when we began discussing compensation. After management initially committed to giving us top of industry pay and full retro pay in exchange for an expedited negotiation schedule and limited list of bargaining priorities, they reneged on their commitments once the talks stalled around compensation. We had informational pickets here in July and August to try to raise awareness of our lack of progress in our negotiations. I'm going to adjust this slightly. But we were severely limited in terms of the number of participants that we were allowed. We had 250 flight attendants and supporters RSVP to demonstrate their support for our fight. But many were frustrated at the port because they could not participate fully. We had to do shifts of 30 people that we shuffled from the parking garage because 30 was our limit. Additionally, and perhaps more importantly, we were hampered by where we were located, which was the north end of the outer roadway that's nowhere near our employer's center of business, the ticket counter. Pressure was put on us because of our chanting, the noise we were making, but our voices are all we have to draw attention to our cause. Chanting at informational pickets is a common labor practice and is allowed at airports across the country, including other West Coast airports that also serve as flight attendant bases. The Association of Flight Attendants and flight attendants all across the country championed and spearheaded the American Rescue Plan Act and the payroll support program that gave taxpayer funds to airlines in the form of loans and grants. This money kept the airlines flying during the pandemic so that essential interstate commerce could continue. Airlines and airports across the country, including PDX, benefited from this continuation of air service, and flight attendants who kept coming to work to continue being aviation's first responders literally risked their lives while there was no vaccine to protect them from the threat of serious illness or death from the coronavirus. Let us remember what those times were like. At Alaska Airlines, we contribute to consistently high customer satisfaction and the operational metrics that are most important to our passengers, including on-time performance, flight completion percentage, and overall passenger satisfaction. Alaska Airlines consistently places in the top 3 of all airlines in these categories and is regularly number 1. Flight attendants literally represent the brand and are often the only company employees passengers interact with or spend any sustained time with. We clearly play a significant role in the success of our airline. Despite their consistent and record profitability, management still demands significant concessions in our negotiations. The company's success should be our success. However, it seems they want us to share in their costs, but not their profits. Throughout our negotiations with Alaska Airlines management, we have been told that our compensation proposals were not economically feasible. That's a direct quote from an executive. But we have a message about economic feasibility as well. And wage increases that are falling far behind the rate of inflation are not economically feasible. The inability to live in our base cities is not economically feasible. Working for free from check-in to takeoff and while on the ground is not economically feasible. The port's own economic impact study presented during the October meeting called out the decline in flight attendant compensation and weakened economic status, with Brianne Preston reporting, and I quote, "The vast majority of occupations in the region don't pay a living wage. And occupations in port business lines perform a little worse than the regional average." She went on to say, again, another quote, "Some of the worst performing occupations are in aviation. And a lot of people are in the worst performing occupations and struggling to earn enough to keep up with affordability, definitely in the Portland area, with the high cost of living and inflation." I know many Alaska Airlines flight attendants who can relate to this struggle. The parties remain far apart in terms of compensation. We're now in federally mediated negotiations with a mediator assigned by the National Mediation Board. And then suddenly, out of the blue, management just last week announced a $1.9 billion acquisition of Hawaiian Airlines. $1.9 billion. After telling us for months that our proposals were not economically feasible, they somehow found a way to buy another airline. Management at Alaska Airlines must think that we don't follow the news. They have money to buy an airline, new airplanes, remodel gates, and open new lounges, but we are considered not economically feasible. It is insulting and it's wrong. And so I'm going to borrow a phrase from Fran Drescher that I'm sure you've all heard, who's the president of SAG-AFTRA. The jig is up, okay? Alaska's flight attendants are frustrated and we're tired of the games. It's time for management to take us seriously and follow through on their commitment to providing an industry-leading contract that recognizes our value and our contributions over the last 9 years, including working through the darkest years of an unprecedented global pandemic. We call on the Port of Portland to revise the overly restrictive rules that severely limit our ability to peaceably assemble and exercise our First Amendment rights. To be effective, we must demonstrate in close proximity to where our company operates and where our passengers can interact with us, not on the outer roadway, where many people cannot read our signs or understand what we're doing or even which airline we represent. I spoke to this commission in early 2015 when the port committed to addressing the plight of unrepresented airport workers who were not making a living wage, most of whom were working without necessary protective gear, and some of whom were working in downright hazardous conditions on the ramp and in surface vehicles. They were desperately trying to organize and form a union so they could improve their working conditions and pay. Seeing them on our airplanes every day and watching how hard they worked, I was happy to come here and give testimony to their struggle. This commission recognized their plight and followed through on a process that raised standards for all employees at PDX. Flight attendants applaud this decision, and we're happy to see the results of those efforts. Today, we ask you to recognize and support us in our efforts to continue in the spirit of improving the worker condition. Unions raise standards. We ask you to recognize how existing rules significantly hinder our ability to engage our passengers, how they create unnecessary obstacles affecting our ability to exercise our free speech rights, and how they negatively impact our ability to bargain effectively with our employer. Most airports across our country allow much greater access for labor to do what labor must sometimes do to advance the quality of workers' lives, not just for union members, but for workers everywhere. We want to see PDX, our airport, be a leader and example for the rest of the country on how to get it right. I have submitted a permit application for an informational picket. We are planning for next Tuesday, December 19th. Yesterday, I spoke with Donna Prigmore and Eric Vanderberg regarding our needs for this picket and explained how different and important this event is to our members at this stage of bargaining. I worked with Donna last month on a leafleting permit, and approximately a dozen of our members, some of them here today, in uniform, leafleted over 1,000 passengers transiting PDX. It was a successful event with no negative impact to the port or our passengers. We were literally inside the terminal. I have great confidence and pride in the professionalism of the 750 plus Portland-based flight attendants that I have the great privilege to represent. I am confident we can continue to partner with you and reach an agreement on a permit that recognizes the unique needs of Alaska Airlines flight attendants at this pivotal moment. I thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Weller. Are there any questions from Commission?
Thank you. I look forward to the discussion later on our agenda, but wanted to ask, could you talk a little bit more about how you've experienced a difference at other airports for the ability to exercise free speech?
Yes, thank you for that, because there is a huge difference between Los Angeles International Airport and Portland. Our council in Los Angeles, which represents approximately 1,000 Alaska Airlines flight attendants, has almost no rules. They don't have to have a permit. They show up with tables and chairs and signs, marching bands, megaphones, noisemakers, homemade signs, signs on poles. They go inside the terminal. They chant loudly, make tons of noise, are very disruptive, and that's probably the polar opposite to what we see in Portland. Elsewhere in the system, there are some rules in place, but Portland International Airport is by far the most restrictive airport in our system, and probably nationwide, if you were to really look. I know there are some restrictions at Seattle because of some new construction, but nowhere near the kinds of restrictions that exist here.
Thank you. Other comments or questions from Commission? All right. Thank you very much. We appreciate your testimony.
Thank you for your time.
All right, I'd like to now call on Jim Lubisher, who I understand is offering his comments virtually. If we can make that connection.
Good morning, Commissioners. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Thank you. The transition to unleaded fuel at Hillsborough Airport is within reach. The EPA has issued their endangerment finding for lead fuel, and now the FAA will initiate rulemaking. But while that happens, the FAA, quote, encourages the early adoption of alternate unleaded fuels. The only currently FAA certified alternate unleaded fuel which can be used in all fixed wing airplane engines and their airframes is G100UL, which is also FAA certified for all helicopter piston engines. Certification for helicopter airframes is pending. G100UL can be mixed with the currently used leaded fuel, commingled, or it's very fungible, as they say. That means no new infrastructure is needed, no new storage tanks, trucks, or pumps. G100UL and current leaded aviation fuel can even be mixed together in aircraft tanks. G100UL production is ramping up and should be available early next year. The Eagle Initiative, quote, will identify at least one unleaded fuel acceptable for safe general aviation fleet use. Now, currently, there is one unleaded fuel acceptable for safe general aviation fleet use, that being G100UL. As Mr. Pippinger has noted previously, the FBOs that sell fuel will need to agree to do so. to sell the unleaded fuel. At Hillsborough Airport, there are 2 FBOs that sell fuel, but also the Aero Flight Training Academy is directly supplied with their fuel. They have 2 tanks at the Flight Training Academy for the current Avgas 100 leaded fuel. Mr. Pippinger also noted that it may be helpful for the port to help with this switch financially. In my submission, I have listed possible incentives for the FBOs and for the flight school. Those incentives include first that, and I hope the noble incentive is that by switching to unleaded fuel, we are protecting the children who live around Hillsborough Airport from further brain damage. The second incentive is financial help, which Mr. Pippinger mentioned before, to help defray the slightly higher cost of G100UL and financial help for the STCs needed. Those are supplemental type certificates that the aircraft receive. The third incentive is litigation. Now, I would note that the port can, and I've mentioned this before, prohibit the sale of leaded fuel at HIO after justifying such prohibition with the FAA. I believe that is potentially feasible. For that information, please see footnote number 10 of my submission. In closing, I am sure that Mr. Braley, who developed G100UL, would be very willing to answer any questions the commissioners may have at a future commission meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I do want to note that commission has received your written testimony as well. All right. Our next virtual presenter is Mickey Barnes, who will be followed by Blaine Ackley. Mickey, if you're available, the mic is yours.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Alexander, members of the commission, I want to thank you for this opportunity to speak. And I want to pick up a little bit on where Jim left off. There are 4 fuel developers involved in the FAA Eagle Initiative. 2 are working through the supplemental type certificates that Jim mentioned. Those are GAMI and SWIFT. GAMI is the only one of all 4 fuel developers that has been approved by FAA and is ready for manufacture and distribution to airports across this country. SWIFT is still working on 100R that can be used in eventually in all aircraft. Yet, despite the availability of these fuels, the port has stated in the past, I think Mr. Pippinger, that he supported PAFI developers, neither of which have a product ready for manufacture and distribution at this time. PAFI has received at least $90 million in government funding over the past 10 years and still has nothing to show for this substantial cash outlay. One of the PAFI developers involves a partnership between Phillips and Afton. According to Aviation Consumer Magazine, quote, Phillips is possibly the largest producer of 100LL. Afton Chemical is a corporate sister company to Ethyl Corporation, which currently imports and distributes tetraethyl lead. We wonder how motivated they are to find a replacement for 100LL, unquote. Per the Phillips 66 website, quote, Phillips 66 is among the largest refiners in the United States and a major contract jet and avgas fuel supplier to private commercial and military aviation, unquote. In other words, Phillips turns a hefty profit from selling leaded avgas and may stand to lose revenue if another fuel developer, such as GAMI or SWIFT, brings an unleaded alternative to market. Then there's Afton Ethyl, the partner to Phillips 66. Included in these comments, which I will provide a written copy, is a link to a 25-minute video entitled "The Man Who Accidentally Caused the Death of Millions of People." A century ago, the Ethel Corporation was founded by Charles Kettering in partnership with Thomas Midgley, the man who created tetraethyl lead. Though both these men knew lead was toxic, they chose to place profits over concern for public health and the environment. When speaking to Kettering about his discovery, Midgley stated, quote, "Can you imagine how much money we're going to make with this? We're going to make $200 million, maybe even more," unquote, a sum that would exceed $3 billion in today's currencies. Quote, and this is from the link to the video, doctors and public health officials from MIT, Harvard, and the US Health Service wrote to Midgley and warned them about producing tetraethyl lead. They called lead a creeping and malicious poison and a serious menace to public health. Their concerns were dismissed, unquote. Though Phillips and Afton both profit from the sale of leaded aviation fuel, the person chose to lead the supply chain and infrastructure pillar of Eagle is Ryan Maynor, who worked for 32 years. I think he's now retired, but he worked, I'm not exactly sure how many years he worked for directly for Phillips 66. But according to the Experimental Aircraft Association posting from a couple years ago, quote, Ryan Maynor is Director, Fuel Quality and Innovation, General Aviation at Phillips 66. He is responsible for General Aviation's quality control, inspection, training, and refueler programs. He is currently leading the team, Phillips 66, working alongside Afton Chemical to develop an unleaded aviation gasoline replacement. And he's also involved in the FAA's Piston Aviation Initiative, unquote. That a person who is leading the Phillips Afton team in developing an unleaded fuel is also in charge of managing supply chain and infrastructure development for GAMI and SWIFT, both of which have developed unleaded avgas alternatives, represents a glaring and egregious conflict of interest. For the reasons set forth, we urge the port to put their support behind GAMI fuel rather than the PAFI program, which has failed to produce results and which has a long history of poisoning and compromising public health while preserving their own profit margins. A March 2023 Aviation Consumer article, Unleaded Avgas, More Foot Dragging, asks, quote, why hasn't Eagle called Swift, Phillips 66, Afton Chemical, Lyondell, or VP Racing on their glaring to us shortcomings? In our opinion, Eagle exists to provide a fleet-wide unleaded fuel solution, and its public actions, for reasons unknown to us, certainly seem to indicate that it is acting as a cheerleader for fuels that are currently incapable of becoming one, while pushing aside the one that is already fully FAA certified. That one is GAMI. Please, just a final comment. I live 12 miles from the Hillsborough Airport in a low ambient noise area. This morning, between 9 a.m. and the present, 3 Hillsborough Aero Academy aircraft circled over my home and decided to do their practice maneuvers there. This happens on a frequent basis. They were in 49194, in 125 MG, in 49191. I've witnessed these flying over this Western Washington County, well below 1,000 feet, and at very slow speeds at times, practicing stalls or whatever the maneuvers are. This is an assault to livability, quality of life, and the environment. Please put a stop to this. This is my home. I didn't move here to provide a flight training area for Hillsborough Aero Academy, ATP, or anyone else. Thank you for hearing my testimony today. Please include it in the meeting minutes.
Yeah, we look forward to receiving receipt of your testimony. Thank you. All right, I would like to ask that we turn the virtual mic over to Blaine Ackley, if Blaine is online.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can. Please proceed.
Good morning, Vice President Alexander and Commissioners. Happy holidays. I'm speaking to you today about a case if a public official writes or calls the port about the aviation fuels that are used at the Hillsborough Airport, they'll get a letter from the port with a 2-page frequently asked questions sheet that purports to provide information about the unleaded fuel issue. For example, the form says the operators need to obtain additional certification in STC before they can use it in their aircraft. The port does not mention that obtaining this certificate is really not difficult. It does cost some money, approximately $200. In other words, the port's response is really not complete, making it look more difficult than it is in fact. The second assertion made is that the port can't require an operator to use unleaded fuel, nor can we prohibit the sale of leaded fuel while it is FAA approved. Meanwhile, what the actual language that the FAA uses is any such proposed restriction must be supported by a valid FAA-approved justification. And with, as Mr. Luberscher has pointed out, with the new EPA findings and the new warnings that are going to be coming out from the FAA about avgas being a danger to public health, this should not be difficult to obtain. Then at the end of the FAQ sheet, the port says the unleaded fuels need to be approved by the FAA, when in fact, as you have heard already, 2 of the unleaded fuels have already been approved by the FAA and the aircraft and engine manufacturers. The port then concludes that it is a supply and chain issue. And that means that, quote, commercializing production so it can be distributed at scale and at a reasonable cost, unquote. Well, isn't this kind of a chicken and egg issue? If the port doesn't request the fuel or doesn't even make any contact with GAMI, the supplier, then they can't develop the production or the supply lines because they don't know. So if the port doesn't contact them, then it is difficult for GAMI to begin to work out supply chain and issues and guarantee a supply because nobody knows if the port really is interested because the port doesn't contact them. In short, the port should be more transparent and more complete with their responses to the public, and most importantly, to elected officials, that they should put their money where their mouth is. Therefore, when you hear Mr. Peppinger speak to you later in this meeting, please be sure that his responses to you commissioners is complete, transparent, and supported by the facts. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ackley, and I go acknowledge that we also are in receipt of your written testimony as well. All right, and I believe that our last presenter is Dale Felk. Am I pronouncing? Okay, well, I acknowledge it on the way in. Please, if you will give me your correct pronunciation, you can hear it come out of my mouth the right way. Well, just how do I pronounce your last name? Feek. Okay, Dale Feek. All right, thank you.
3 feet facts from Feek.
All right.
I used to have newsletters.
All right. Well, please feel free to offer your testimony. want to acknowledge that we have received.
Through email,
Yes.
President Alexander and Commissioners. I'm Dale Feek, Chair of the Washington County Citizen Action Network and also Project Director of Hillsborough Air and Water. So you have received, now you have actually a written copy, and I have a few other things. I hope you really listen carefully to the people that have already spoken, Lubisher and Ackley and Mickey Barnes. They've been involved in, at least Mickey Barnes has been involved in this for a long time. She has a lot of knowledge. Sometimes I don't quite agree the way we do business, but I totally agree with the way the information she gives you. So please listen and take that very seriously. Okay. In my what I have given you, I say, at a Neighbors for Clean Air event in Portland in November, David Breen, and most of you know him, I assume, and I had a chance to talk. He concurred with Stephen Nagy that, and this is, I quote, if you both, that's Mike Gallagher and me, Dale Feek, have some time in the near future, I'd like to get together with some of the members of the port team that are working on these issues of electrification and unleaded avgas so that they can share directly with you our efforts, our challenges, and our successes. That's quoted from below from what you can read. When I told David Breen that I have a pilot's license, not a current medical, and I previously sent you a little thing I sent to my flight instructor a long time ago. I didn't, you have that as an attachment, but I didn't print it here. Let's see, where am I? And that Mike Gallagher is a former Air Force pilot, transferred jets, former captain of Intel's jet stationed in California in Hillsborough Airport, and a former volunteer of Hillsborough Airport Roundtable Exchange that's since been disbanded. David said that we have the credentials, Mike and I, and the right desire to make Hillsborough Airport a non-leaded fuel operation. David said he will work with Stephen Nagy to do that. Please note below that Mike Gallagher's reply to Stephen Nagy. Please note that. So I attached the Port of Portland Board of Commissioners bio, how to make public comment. I'm impressed with you as commissioners. I read all your bios. Some of you have doctors of law, attorneys, you know, your JDs, and some of you are in the health profession, and some of you are, I think you are in union stuff. You know, so you have affinity to a lot of different groups. And so I hope you, and you all been appointed by a governor, not the current governor necessarily, but former governors, and you've been appointed for good reason, because you think well, you can analyze stuff, and you can make the good decisions for the public good as well as the port. That's just something I just said. And so I ask you to please open and read this letter to the Port of Portland, Governor Kate Brown, but it's now Tina Kotek, Washington County Board of Commissioners, Mayor Steve Calloway, and Hillsborough councilors, with 29 Portland-based organizations supporting our request to the Port of Portland provide currently FFA-approved and unleaded fuels, such as UL94 from Swift Fuels and GAMI, and the other people have talked about those. And so we also asked the Port of Portland, the city of Hillsborough, and Washington County to form a working group with the Washington County Citizen Action Network, I'm chair, to develop a plan to reduce lead emissions from aviation fuel use, starting with options available now and continuing until lead from aviation fuel is no longer putting health of our citizens at risk. And so I'm saying that to Steve Nagy, to David Brin, and to the Port administration, that we're willing to work with those entities to get this done quickly because we want to protect public health. So I'm just saying that. Please work with me and with Mike Gallagher. Mike Gallagher is our spokesman. He knows more than I know. He studies this stuff. He reads the airplane stuff, you know, technical stuff. He reads it. He knows what he's doing. He's been in the business. I only have 140 hours, got a pilot's license, scared the heck out of me, but I got one, and I enjoyed the idea of being up in the air and looking down. So Please take these people seriously. Do something about it as soon as possible. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for your testimony. And again, we are in receipt of the communications that you shared with us this morning. Thank you. All right, if there are no other participants in open forum presentation, we'll move on to our general discussion. And I would ask if Dan Pippinger would take us through our first item.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you all from the public for the comments. I actually hope these two general discussion items will be fruitful to address some of those issues. We're going to start with free speech rules. We can go to the next slide. As noted, I think we've talked before, the port has a long history of permitting free speech activities here at the port. We do, as every airport does, try to balance the safety and efficiency of the airport with the right of assembly and free speech. But that does mean we do put restrictions at times on how, when, and where the protests can occur. We do work with the permit applications. I'll talk about that in a moment. But usually when the permit application is submitted, we negotiate with the entity on what our concerns are, what they're trying to achieve, where they're trying to achieve it, and try to come up with the best solution that balances those two needs of airport operations, safety, security, along with free speech. We can go to the next slide, please. I'd like to talk a little bit about the, I think you're one ahead of me. If you can go back one. I'd like to talk a little bit about like the history of our free speech program and why we are where we are today and what is coming in the future. Before we were constrained due to construction in the ticket lobby and activity levels in the ticket lobby, we generally allowed leafleting and picketing within the terminal area, particularly in the north and south passageways between the ticket lobby and the Oregon market. Requests for larger groups would be out on the roadway. And we also allowed indoor individuals and other case-by-case requests approved, including pamphleting, which was noted that we just did recently. So that's where we were before we really got into the impacts of the Terminal Core project. And we can go to the next slide. So with the Terminal Core project, we have a lot less room, and we're certainly jammed up at certain times of the day. So we've adjusted those locations during construction to ensure safety and efficiency were not compromised, but still allowing the free speech activity. This includes picketing, which has been restricted to the outer roadway, as Stephen mentioned, and leafleting inside the terminal on a case-by-case basis. Leafleting inside the terminal, but we're working on the locations depending on what's trying to be achieved, the time of day, and the activity going on. And then just noting that over the past 3 years, we've had 9 requests for free speech permits. These has included groups as large as 50, as Stephen mentioned, up to individuals that want to demonstrate with free speech inside of it. So let's go to the next slide. What's the future hold for us? Oh, you're too far fast. One back, please. The future for us is that when we open the new Terminal Core, you can go one more. No, maybe not. Let's go back one. Clearly, my slide sequence is not the same as in the back room. I think what I really want to point out is when we open the new Terminal Core complex on the phase 1 on the 22nd of May, and we see how it runs, we will reevaluate our ability to bring picketing back inside the terminal. That is certainly our intent. We feel that this putting it out on the roadway is a temporary measure for us unless it's a very large crowd. And we will then do that again at the end of phase 2, at the end of 2025, when we open the phase 2 of the Terminal Core project. So we're looking forward to this additional space. I think there'll be plenty of space to allow more activity inside the terminal as we move forward. And we'll look forward to that. Next slide, please. We definitely have heard testimony both last week and this week on what happens at different airports. The port reached out to other airports across the board here. You can see Portland, Seattle, San Diego, San Francisco, Los Angeles International, all West Coast airports. And then we compared ourselves also to 3 what we'll call maybe sister airports, Salt Lake City, Tampa, and Nashville. And I think the testimony is certainly correct that LAX has a very open and broad policy. However, they have clear guidance on not to interfere with the flow, work performance of tenants, employee and safety, things of that nature. But they're not restrictive in the context of it. The other airports have very similar rules to PDX. We are not an outlier. However, I understand the desire for more activity, more disruptive activity, and more access to the employer. So next slide, please. We will go ahead to the next slide then, please. We will continue to work. I know that the latest permit application was in. I talked to my team yesterday. We are trying to figure out how to bring the pickers closer to the terminal. We really can't move them on the outer roadway because we'd have to move a business to do that. But we certainly know that there are different times of the day when we have different levels of activity. And I've asked the team to work with the Flight Attendants Union to see what we can work out like we always do. I just would remind the commission, we have had difficulty at the port in the past, not with any group we're talking about here, but we had demonstrations in 2017 pro and anti the administration. And we had a violent assault associated with those protests. So just, there is a real issue for us in managing the how, the when, and the where that activity occurs to both keep the public safe, employees safe, but allow that free speech activity in the airport to operate efficiently. And we take that very seriously, and we'll continue to work with any permit applications to do that. Thank you.
Okay, any questions or comments from Commission? Commissioner Neri?
Thanks. So I'll first just say I may have a potential conflict of interest regarding this because I do union stuff, as it was pointed out in my day job. But I have a couple questions first, Ian, on the chart that you have, the comparison. A couple of things that have been mentioned in the commentary were around the number of people restrictions, as well as the permit in advance. And can you speak to other ports and whether or not those 2 conditions are included?
I cannot right now. What I have from the team was whether activity is allowed within 10 feet of the queuing, whether amplification, chanting, and dancing were allowed, whether stands, tables, and chairs were allowed, and whether you could obstruct entrances and exits. So no, I don't have a number per se. I could ask the team if they have that specifically and could answer it. Yes, I'll ask Steve Nagy maybe to come up and answer that specific question. That's okay with me.
My phone is on silent and I don't know why it's making noise, but.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning, commissioners. Yes, through our research, it varies airport to airport, but we are not an outlier in requiring both a permit. Many airports do that. Many of our peer airports do that. And also putting limitations on the numbers of that. There are other airports. The numbers sometimes vary depending on the event or the airport, but we are in line with what our peer airports that we listed there are doing.
I do have some comments too. And I first off just want to thank all of the people who are associated with providing services to air travelers, and it goes beyond as a port commission, the Marine staff as well, but we're talking about the airport today. So flight attendants, pilots, passenger service assistants, janitors, fuelers, the retail and restaurant employees, ticketing agents. We have been the best airport in the country and will be again. And it is really the people who make all of that true. So just taking a moment to really acknowledge the work that you do, and thank you. I think one thing I would note as being on this commission for a few years now is that the airlines and big businesses that profit off of what the aviation and business that travels through aviation have a lot of access to port staff, a lot of access to port decision makers. And I see this as an opportunity for us as a port to say, let's make sure the folks working on the front lines in aviation also have access to be able to talk and share your viewpoints. And doing that through the free speech rules. Hearing some of these numbers, I may not be totally accurate in saying this, but I believe the number I've heard that there are 10,000 port-related jobs here at PDX, not direct port employees, but 10,000 employees. So when I put that in comparison to 10 to 20 people being able to take an action or speak out, or possibly 50, those numbers are very small in comparison to the number of people that are working here. And, I see it, and we have it up on the wall, the piece around shared prosperity, and hear the voices today from the flight attendants really talking directly about how they're trying to advance shared prosperity. And, I don't know the statistics, but I'm guessing a majority of flight attendants are women, many are people of color, and folks that we want to be raising up as a port. And I think it's important that we're able to hear from them. So I would encourage us as a port to consider, how do we expand the access of port-related employees to be able to speak out?
Is it appropriate to offer just 2 quick points for you at this stage?
That is not our policy. That is not our practice. I mean, we've accepted certainly a broad sharing of perspective, but this is not designed to be an exchange of information. Thank you. Other commissioner comments?
Thank you. I also want to acknowledge the work that you do, and thank you. It's clearly a challenging time for us, given the timing of the construction project and the fact that you are in the middle of negotiations that are not going well. So I think what I would like port staff to do is, echoing what Meg said, stay in close communication with the flight attendants union as we move forward. If there's anything we can do that's creative, that protects the safety and the ability to move passengers through the airport, particularly during the holidays, which are coming up, which we always know are a very difficult time. But if there's a creative way to allow a little more access, maybe closer to where the Alaska ticket lobby is, so it is truly the passengers that use Alaska that can hear their position, I think that would be useful. It is a very, very tricky, balancing act. And as we all have, I've traveled through the airport a lot. I've been here when it's been very busy. Yesterday, I actually took the chance yesterday afternoon to walk through the airport and kind of get a sense. I couldn't go through security, but kind of get a sense what was happening outside. And it wasn't busy. And clearly there was room, but that's also not the time when they want to be distributing information, because no one was there to receive it. So my request is obviously to be very considerate of their position, to do that balancing act, and just see if there's a little bit of creativity in any way that we can provide a little bit more access.
I also want to just thank you. I am a frequent traveler, and Alaska Airlines is one I depend on personally and really appreciate. And you're absolutely correct. It is the attendants who make that experience. So I want to say that I appreciate that absolutely. Just a question. I am also mindful, because I do travel a lot. I'm also mindful of the restrictions that this is not the normal airport environment, and also mindful of safety, and certainly some of the incidents recently too. Just making sure that there's adequate flow in the building. I'm just curious in terms of creativity on if there are conditional. risk assessments that go a long way. You were talking about the incident a few years ago. There may be very different risk assessments that could be applicable to the different types of groups that are requesting about flexibility built into those rules based on risk assessments that are conducted, and whether that plays into the decision making in providing some flexibility to I'll call responsible citizens in the building trying to protect their free speech rights.
Dan, please.
Thank you, Commissioner. That is correct. We do those risk assessments, and that is the conversation I had with the team yesterday, was knowing where we are now and the number they've asked for. Is there something more we can do? We have removed the scaffolding out of the ticket lobby, so it's a little cleaner. So it's about time and place, but we are going to work with them to try to do the best we can and find that balance. And that is always the way we try to do it. I think I just wanted to be clear that we are not an outlier of airports on how we do this. And I'm proud of the track record we have of facilitating the work as well. So we'll continue to do that. And I guess I want to say one last thing. I'm sorry. I want to echo my thanks for frontline workers. I know that, running the port and both the marine business back in the pandemic and the aviation business, it is our frontline workers who carried us through the pandemic. And I don't want us to forget that. And I thought Stephen brought up a really good point. It's easy to forget 2 years ago, 3 years ago, where we were and what people did to help other people get through it. And that's always close to my heart, because that is taking care of people is our number one priority. So thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, I want to also, echo all of our thanks. And what you guys do is you are the point of contact with the public, and you do a phenomenal job. And it is my favorite airline personally, but shouldn't be biased. But it is because of the direct service that you guys provide. I also, as a labor leader, past president of ILW Local 8, also feel that it is paramount that we do whatever we can to have flexibility for you to make your message public to the people that do use those services, especially in the circumstance that we have right now. I mean, to be in a labor dispute or in a contract negotiation for that period of time, obviously there's some issues, and you need the ability to make your case to the public. So I would appreciate anything that we can do to have that maximum flexibility. I think it is important to be able to be close on the inside as well. Maybe not everybody, because there are constraints because of the construction that we have to be aware of. And we have an obligation too, not to be disruptive, but to try to get the message across. So I think, as most of our commissioners here, I think would agree, we need to do what we can to try to support this. But I think it's on both sides, us and you, everybody has to be thoughtful of trying to achieve those goals, but still be able to have the airport be able to operate safely. Anyway, thank you for what you guys do. I really do appreciate it.
So Alaska is my favorite airline as well. And thank you for the work you do. This is, as others have noted, a difficult time, both in terms of managing air construction, and obviously you were faced with a difficult negotiation. So I'd like to add my voice too, is within the constraints that we have of protecting free speech and public safety, let's try to find the best solution we can.
Other comments? If not, let me also offer my thanks and the acknowledgement, I think, of the perspectives that have been offered by Commission. In some ways, we are at a pivot point. The challenges that we face now with construction will not be with us forever. We will settle into a much more normative environment. And I think it's going to allow us to sort of take the lessons from this most stressful time into that new space. And hopefully, it will allow us to pivot. We've pivoted in other areas of the operation of the port, and this should be no different. I think we will understand what we've learned and we'll use it. And as I look out the window and I can see Mount Hood, I'm reminded mountains are created through tension. They're not created when everybody is shifting in the same direction at the same time. And we look to create a mountain of prosperity and progressiveness. And that means that at times a byproduct will be the tension associated with it. But hopefully it's driven by a desire to sort of achieve the same outcome. So we welcome that, we encourage it, and we thank you for who you are, what you do, and how you allow us to present ourselves to the rest of the world. Thank you. All right. Without the other comments, Dan, I'd like to have you move into our next item.
Thank you, Commissioner. The next item is on the path to unleaded aviation fuel. And I really want to, again, thank the public for the good testimony today. We can go to the next slide, please. Since unleaded aviation gas and newer products, there's inevitable issues regarding availability, safety, and cost barriers as the product and the markets mature. Nonetheless, the port is committed to working through these issues, including ensuring that the cost of fuel, as well as the required certification of aircraft and use of the new fuel, are competitive with current aviation gas. It is an imperative, I think, to move to unleaded fuel, right? We got rid of it in automobiles decades ago. And so as a country, we're late to the game, I think, on trying to get rid of lead in fuel. It's definitely not good for the environment and certainly not good for people. And the port is committed to a transition of unleaded aviation fuel as soon as possible. Next slide, please. Just wanted to clarify some public testimony. We are in close contact with the manufacturers of the GAMI unleaded avgas, which has been approved, talking to them about both production and distribution. We frequently talk to them, at least monthly, and have been doing that for quite a while. Unfortunately, the lead is not currently commercially available at scale, and there's no mass production and supply chain established for the fuel. We have made all the investments necessary to accept the fuel when it arrives, and we are also taking a leadership position on electric aircraft industry. We are partnering with the Oregon Department of Aviation. We are submitting for a demonstration project at Hillsborough Airport to bring in the infrastructure for electric aircraft as a pilot project. But regardless of whether we get that grant and that project or not, we know that electric aircraft are coming. It's certainly a topic here at PDX as well. And thinking about the planning and development of the infrastructure to support that, the power demands and the feeds into those facilities is high on our list of things to do. Next slide, please. We certainly have been engaged with the aviation gas manufacturers, as I mentioned with GAMI. We're going to continue to do that. We've been in close conversation with our what are called fixed-based operators, or FBOs, particularly at Hillsborough Airport, talking to them about, if unleaded aviation gas is available, how would you use it? How do you need it distributed? How much do you need at the times you need it? And what are the cost parameters that you might consider? We're also participating in the FAA's EAGLE initiative, which was mentioned, right? It's Eliminate Aviation Gas Lead Emissions. There's 4 elements to that project. I won't bore you with the FAA whole rigmarole of what it is, but the 4th one is on the safe deployment and transition of the new fuel. And the Port of Portland actually is participating in that work group, really on the transition planning for nationwide distribution and sales of unleaded fuel. So we know we want it. We want it as quickly as we can get it, and we want to participate in that program to get there and figure out how to get it. I think we've also been in close contact with the flight training school, which was mentioned as well, because we think that's probably a big opportunity, right? That's a lot of flights. And if we can work with the Air Academy to maybe get it in the training aircraft, that would be a big step forward on eliminating a lot of emissions. It's one thing for a private owner of the plane who flies it, infrequently, to take the unleaded avgas. But the flight school, which has a lot of operations on a day-to-day basis, really presents the best opportunity to make the biggest impact quickly. Next slide, please. We are moving forward to engage the Hillsborough Airport Community Advisories Committee on the unleaded avgas issue. I think Dale Feek, your request is exactly where we're headed. We want to set up a working committee out in the Hillsborough community with you and others, but with a lot of people in the community, because we need some really diverse perspectives as well on manufacturing, distribution, besides community members. But all of that needs to be together. And so by early next year, we plan to set up a community group out there for some informed discussions about the complexity of the issues and available alternatives, but really to also figure out how we can work together to make this happen as soon as possible. We also, I'm very proud to note that we have engaged the Oregon Department of Aviation, and they are actually setting up a work group on this also at the state level, because it's not just a Hillsborough issue. It's a general aviation issue for the entire state. And I'm very pleased, Steve Nagy, our Director of Airport Operations, sits on the Oregon Department of Aviation board. And I really appreciate the engagement with the Oregon Department of Aviation to get their assistance as well. And then finally, we really need to figure out how to make this financially competitive. People will cite all sorts of numbers on what the cost difference will be. None of us know what it's going to be because it's not manufactured and not distributed right now. But we know, just like sustainable aviation fuel for the jet industry, it's not going to be the same cost. And so addressing that delta is going to be very important for us on figuring out how to go forward. And whether that's the Port of Portland, whether it's the state, whether it's the manufacturers, the federal government, or the users, we have to find a way to make it economically feasible to really get it into the aircraft and get it into the aircraft quickly. Next slide, please. That's the end of the presentation. I really appreciate the chance to provide the update. This is a priority for the Port of Portland. I think engaging with the community out in Hillsborough directly is a good step for us to be more clear and transparent and also share information. It doesn't mean that we won't be pushed by the community, and that's okay, because we think it's an important issue for us and it's a high priority for us right now. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would open up questions or comments from Commissioner Luther.
Just a thank you for that. I know this is a really important issue for the health and safety of the community, but also for the port and the region. I think I know you feel strongly about making this happen. So I want to recognize the work of the port behind the scene to really go after this complex issue. I know it's everyone feels impatient because we want to get this done, and I think. I hear from everyone, and I just want the community to know that, you know, we hear from you and know and see the work you're doing. So with regards to the community engagement, can you just give us a perspective on when we might expect that the standing up of that community engagement next year?
Yes, I expect the first meeting will start with the HACA committee meeting by the end of January or early February and work from there to establish the committee. The sooner the better. It's a high priority for me, and I know that the internal port teams, both the operations, environmental, and community engagement teams, are working on this right now. It's important to me that we get started and get connected with people. I appreciate the public dialogue at Commission, but having a working group where we can sit down with each other, share information, is going to be much more fruitful in terms of actually making progress.
Other comments, Commissioner Lamb?
Thank you, Dan, and thanks to the port staff as well for your work on this. While the commission hasn't taken any kind of formal vote stating our support of moving away from leaded avgas as soon as possible, I know in our conversations with each other and with staff, there is no doubt that that is where the commission and the staff want to go. I think for the community, obviously, we hear from them often, which is what we're here for. There is definitely a level of frustration, and standing up that committee to allow more dialogue maybe can help While it won't alleviate the frustration, maybe it can help provide more continuous and regular information exchange so that we are sharing the latest information that we have. I think that's critically important right now. It sounds like, Mr. Vice President, we have another mountain in front of us. So I think we all want to get to the place where we can say we now have unleaded avgas in general aviation aircraft, and celebrate, but work from now to then and anything that we can do to provide updated, regular information to the community and allow them to present information to us that maybe we're not aware of will be very helpful. So thank you.
Yes, please.
So I want to build on what Commissioner Koba just said, which is, there is clearly a sense of frustration in terms of the progress towards eliminating lead in avgas. Hearing from Dan, and as Commissioner Koba said, in our discussions, we share in that goal of moving as quickly as possible. I think it'd be good, Dan, if as soon as we stand up this committee or working group, if there is an articulation of a roadmap that's a feasible roadmap and that we can measure our progress against that roadmap, that'd be a good thing to have us review on a periodic basis.
Thank you, Commissioner Sampa. Commissioner Stroder.
Thank you, Dan. That was actually a very, very good presentation of it, because it has been hard for us to articulate how, as a commission, how supportive we are of this, other than just in general terms. One of my questions would be, when you were talking to Gamma, what are the roadblocks that they see? Because it seems like, to steal a quote there, it is the chicken or the egg in a way. We're all very supportive, want to move in that direction. But if it's not being manufactured, we don't even have the ability to have access to it. It's very difficult. And who can the community at large begin to maybe exert some pressure on, whether it be the FAA or other bodies, to help precipitate moving in that direction?
Thank you. First of all, I'm not the one talking to GAMI, so I want to be careful about this. Producing a fuel that's approved is different than commercially producing it and finding somebody who's willing to produce it at a price you think you can sell it. So that has been the challenge. The producers of the fuel don't have, or the producers of the fuel that was approved do not have production capability. I think I'm looking to make sure I get a head nod in the back. They're not fuel producers. They're scientists who have developed a fuel that's been approved. So now they have to figure out how to get it manufactured and manufactured at a price. And then you can figure out, depending on where it is and the price, how you're going to distribute it and what the cost of that distribution is. Those are just things we're going to have to work through. But the more, the testimony is correct. The more pressure people are putting on to ask for it, the more somebody's going to say, well, I figure I can make $1 off this. I'll produce it and I'll distribute it. So it's that engagement, both with the manufacturer and with the federal government in particular. The EPA endangerment finding that was published, we think, will really start pushing this even harder, because now there's an EPA ruling that lead in avgas is dangerous to people. So we're hopeful that that's going to help, spur things on as we move forward. And I don't remember if you had a second part to the question. I missed that.
Well, what I was saying is to really help the community to redirect some of these things to the pressure points that can get this moving forward, to maybe identify who they need to contact, how we can pressure this to get it to actually move, because directing it, although it makes us conscious of the situation we don't have the ability to move forward on the field, so to speak.
I think that's great work for the working committee to think about. I'm really pleased that the state Department of Aviation has agreed to put this on their agenda, because I think it's a bigger issue than one airport. And so I think that kind of elevation at the state level, not to say put pressure, but to get partners at different levels asking for this and querying the federal government on what can be done to get this moving, I think is positive. But I think in terms of like focusing direction, I think that's actually a good conversation. If you get port staff, some community leaders, concerned citizens in a room together, they can develop a strategy on how to move forward together and put the pressure in multiple points, I think, that will help us instead of just hitting one over and over again.
All right. Thank you very much. If there are no other comments from commission, we'll move on to our next item. And I think, Dan, we're going to call on Stan Waters to present this one.
Good morning, commissioners. I'd just like to point out before I introduce the item and Danelle that really this item is tied to also the first action item that is on the agenda today, and it I guess I'm the grandfather now of the resilience program. Yeah. But this is near and dear to my heart. So for the first item, the purpose of this presentation is to provide an overview of the Port's resilience program and share program development and future planned work. And the goal of the program is to reduce vulnerabilities to impacts of hazards such as earthquakes, wildfire, high heat events, storms, among other things, and position the Port to quickly recover and return to operations after such an event. So just as a little background, and I was involved in this in the background of, in 2013, the Oregon Resilience Plan was identified that Portland International Airport and Terminal 6 are both critical transportation facilities for Oregon and for the region. And since then, based on that, the Port has been steadily working towards building a resilience program that prepares for the impacts, specifically when we started, the impacts of a magnitude 9 Cascadia subduction zone earthquake. Significant investments have been made. We've identified essential services. We've assessed critical infrastructure of the Port. We've developed mitigation measures, and we have implemented those measures. Investment in the recent PDX suite of projects and the capital improvements provided an opportunity to increase our level of our expected building performance during a Cascadia subduction zone event. And program development since that beginning of starting with an earthquake as what we were trying to protect our infrastructure about, we've also evolved to include all natural hazards and integrating climate, energy, and zero carbon emission goals within the program. Here today to provide the overview is Danelle Peterson, who is our program development manager in our planning and development department.
Excited. Okay. Excited to speak with you all about our program. It doesn't sound, there it is. Okay, got it. Thanks. So I've been with the Port for about 16 years. Most of that time I was actually in the environmental group, and I've recently transferred over to planning and development. So there's a few people who know a little bit more about this program than I do, but excited to be part of it. Next slide, please. So Stan set us up pretty well about what our resilience program aims to do. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about how we're building resilience through partnerships, strategic infrastructure investment. So providing you all with a little bit of background, how we got to where we are today, some key projects we've accomplished, and what we're looking to do in the future. Next slide, please. Sorry, this microphone's a little in and out. Do my best. So resilience is one of those words that can mean different things depending on which program you're representing or where you're sitting. But for for organizational resilience and what we're talking about today, it's our ability to prepare to withstand and recover from major disruptive events through this strategic planning and utility investment and partnerships. So our organizational resilience does include our business continuity department, our emergency management, and then also where I sit with resilient infrastructure. So business continuity is just looking at returning to operations. Emergency management is protection of property and life and property. And then what I'm looking at is how to harden our infrastructure to make us be able to recover and make that infrastructure less vulnerable. And then I should note like why this work is important, that we do it, why the port is doing it. And we're, as Stan pointed out, we're an agency that provides critical lifelines to the region. So it's really important that we're working on this. And then also it does fit in with our strategic goals. So our program really supports building an airport for the future and leveraging the port strengths to create a more equitable and prosperous region. So next slide, please. Maybe just talk right in this thing. Okay, so how we do resilient infrastructure planning, we first look at our essential services, and those are services that are critical to maintaining our operations. And then from there, we look at the infrastructure that supports those operations. And then we begin to assess risk and figure out how to mitigate risks to that infrastructure to support our operations. And once we've done that planning and assessment, we start to build out our capital investment program. And once we know where our risks are and how we want to invest, we make sure that we're not only just including seismic resilience, but also life cycle of our assets, so asset management, and then also beginning to understand other natural hazard impacts like climate, flooding, heat, those sort of things. So when we're investing, we want to make sure that we're getting the most of our dollars. Also, infrastructure planning requires a lot of coordination with other partners, state, federal, and local. One for partnering to receive grants, getting those grants, and then also our infrastructure ties in with other agencies. It's not, we're just not in a box on our own. Our pipes tie into other county, city, and state infrastructure. So there's a lot of coordination that goes on there as well. Next slide, please. So Stan kind of set us up for this a little bit. This is just kind of the roadmap of where the program has been over the last decade. And it really did get kicked off with the Oregon Resilience Plan. In that plan, Oregon wanted to better prepare and more formally prepare for a major Cascadia subduction zone event. It was inspired by two previous magnitude 9 earthquakes, one in Japan and one in Chile that really they were tragic, disastrous, and we really wanted to get going on how to better mitigate that those impacts. And so Stan was a big part of that. He was on the executive team, many committees. We also had Tom Peterson at the time, the director of engineering, participated, and our current seismic engineer, Tom Wharton, was on that. So since that time, most of what we've focused on has been in the seismic arena, but more recently moving toward other natural hazards. The port got to work right away. After 2013 and 2015, we did a big corporate risk assessment of our infrastructure, and that plan, that study recommended that we invest in key pieces of infrastructure that have high value to our operations, and also let's see where to say exactly. So yeah, high value and revenue generation was the word I was looking for, as well as a significance to the regional economy. And so those pieces of infrastructure, no surprises, terminal concourses, our runway, and our central utility plant. So a lot of the planning that we've done, we've actually begun to operationalize and build and improve over these last 10 years. So it's been pretty exciting. Next slide, please. And we'll hit on, I'll touch on some of these other milestones throughout the presentation. So this this is a graphic, kind of an outcome of an exercise we did back in 2019. We called it the Seismic Performance Assessment and Recommendations. And this exercise really identified this concept of a little airport. And so what that means is like a target of, after an event happens, getting back to commercial recovery as soon as possible. And we set a goal, the sliding goal, but a goal of around 6 million airline passengers a year to get to that goal as quickly as we can. So maybe 3 to 6 months, somewhere shortly after a large event. And so we want to invest in infrastructure that sets us up to get to that commercial recovery as soon as possible. And just for context, this year we're planning on landing around 16 million airline passengers, close of the calendar year, and pre-COVID we were around 20. So it's a little airport concept. Next slide, please. So this was a really exciting study. This was a keystone study for us. We partnered with the National Institute of Building Sciences, and they did what they call the Resilient Runway cost benefit ratio analysis. And the results of this study were presented to commission back in 2021, but I'll just hit on the highlights again, and plus we have new commissioners, because it was a big keystone study for us. So basically, the biggest outcome was for every dollar we invest, we'll save about $50 post event. So every dollar we invest in the runway, $50 will be saved. So the study estimated that we'll have an overall savings of about $7.4 billion. And then of that, $460 million in health and medical benefits. So just thinking about, we're just under $3 million in our area. So having medical evacuations through PDX will save thousands of lives. So being able to bring in help to get people emergency response through PDX. And $1.2 billion in reduced business and interruption losses, $4 million in reduction to repair costs to the remaining runway, unstrengthened runway damage, and then $5.7 billion from the fast reoccupancy of buildings, and that is flying in building inspectors to recertified buildings so people can get back in them and start relaunching the economy. Next slide, please. So we've done quite a few studies to get to the point of settling on a resilient south runway. So the port partnered with our consultant GSI and also Oregon State Institute to study how our soils in this area would respond to a Cascadia subduction zone event, and also help determine which runway would make the most sense for investment and what that mitigation effort should be. So y'all know we chose the south runway, and our mitigation is deep soil mixing, and that's kind of what this graphic is a cartoon of. A follow-on study to that NIPS economic impact analysis was they recommend we do an economic impact study. So the port hired Portland State University. We partnered with them to do that. And that study had two major findings, a quantitative and more qualitative one. Quantitative, they did just some demographic analysis, and they found that, I'll just read it off my paper, they found that shutdowns are most likely to impact male African American, Hawaiian, or Pacific Islanders over the age of 55 if the airport shuts down. And then their qualitative finding that they found through a series of interviews with airport workers was that the airport and the services enabled with a working airport provide a critical sense of safety and security to people. So it's an interesting finding. And there also has been a lot of effort and work securing state and federal funding. So far, we've gotten $4 million in lottery bonds and $3.7 million in a Congressional Pre-Disaster Mitigation Grant. And we've also put $1 million of our own funding towards the design of the resilient runway. And so we're working on that now, and we expect to have 100% design by December 2024. still working on fund day for the construction of the runway. Next slide, please. So another effort we just kicked off that we're really excited about is we're studying what to do with the central utility plant. I mentioned before it was identified as a critical asset for us. It's what, you may have heard the term, it's the heart and lungs of the airport. This facility was built back in 1972, and it houses all of our critical infrastructure, power, heating, ventilation, a lot of important communications. So we don't expect it to perform well under a large earthquake or maybe even any earthquake. So we're taking this in two parts. The first phase, we're going to just look at what to do with the building. So does it make most sense to retrofit the building? Does it make more sense to just build a new one? Or should we eliminate a single point of failure and maybe have smaller distributed utility plants? So that's the finding we hope to get to by the end of this fiscal year. And then phase 2, we would be looking more at the distribution, so hardening or what we can do for resilience for those pathways between the central utility plant and those critical services. It's also an opportunity to look at how can we add on climate resilience, stack that objective, and we're also hoping to receive some grant funding for not only doing these in-depth analysis as well as any construction or building we might want to do. Next slide, please. So this is a graphic showing where we've invested in our central facilities to date. We really laid a plan out and we started doing it. So the black outlined or dark green, those are facilities that we've invested beyond building code, so beyond just life and safety, get out of the building. These were, their target performance was increased to be able to occupy this building after a large event. So it should be safe to be in the building, but things may not be functional. For example, the lights won't be on, there won't be communication, but you can be in the building, and then we can bring those other utilities on shortly thereafter. The one facility that we did bring up to operational was our EOC. So that building, after a large event, we're planning that it could be operational. So communications, power should be able to function. The runway doesn't have building code, but we just included that because we do plan on it to be operational after a large event. For the central utility plant, we will land somewhere between occupiable and operational, but that's TBD right now. Next slide. And so this just put some dollars amounts to those investments. So in our planning and design, we've invested around 10 million, probably more than that. We just pulled the larger planning events or planning exercises we've done. And our capital improvements, we've invested around 216 million. Most of our investments in planning have been at PDX, but there has been some seismic improvements done at T6. 2011, we did some structural improvements of the columns beneath berth 604 and 605. So, next slide. So this work takes a lot of internal partnerships and external. So internally, we are literally working across all port departments to make this program fly and work, to make sure we're doing it well. And then also regionally, we have some key partners in terms of just that where our infrastructure is intertwined with other agencies. For example, the Urban Flood Safety and Water Quality District, they keep us from flooding. So we want to partner with them and make sure levees and pump stations understand how those would work after post-event and see what planning we can do. Multnomah County and the City of Portland are also important partnerships. There are agencies listed on here that we'd probably partner with for more of an emergency management point of view, but these are all important partners in terms of getting grants from and making sure we're planning and coordinating regionally together. Next slide, please. So this is the last slide. So more work to do. We have more critical facility assessments to do. So Concourse C, the canopy between the terminal and P1 we want to look at, upper and lower roadways, and continue to integrate our planning and mitigation efforts into our capital improvement plans. And then, as I mentioned, making sure, starting to think about our other key facilities, specifically Terminal 6, and how we're going to increase our resiliency there. And then also figuring out how to pay for all this. So continuing to work on grant funding. The South Runway is a big one there. And that's all I have for you today. Happy to answer any questions. And I know there's other resilience experts in the room that can help me out if I'm not able to answer one of your questions.
Great, thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you. This is really important work. I'm always mindful as a Pacific Northwesterner. My husband and I were at the beach this weekend, and you can't help but thinking about the Cascadia subduction event and hoping that the timing and we all are pretty resilient. So appreciate the work and planning. My question relates to what kinds of assumptions made in terms of workforce resilience, because while the runway may be operational, actually people to operate that facility. And, while we can't control household resiliency, I'm just curious in terms of what the contingencies are within the plan and how we think about that as it relates to airport operations.
Yeah, that's a really great question. It's a little bit out of my arena. I might look at Dan or Stan to answer that. It might be kind of it fall in the business continuity circle of the Venn diagram, but maybe Dan or Stan.
It's a great question. So we think, particularly at PDX, we're going to have to rely on people from outside, right? So we think about having the runway is the important thing. But for example, for airfield lighting, for any fuel brought in, we're probably going to lean on the Department of Defense to show up and provide that, which they have that capability for their mission as it is. So they're we haven't gotten to the point. It's the workforce part is super hard because maintenance staff that might be working at the time of the event might be here, right? Because they can't go anywhere else. But we don't know who that is, and we don't know what time of day it is. But when we really think about it, the key thing is to get that runway open. And that's the most important thing. So I know that the team is thinking about pre-staging equipment and fuel. So if there is any cleaning of the runway or whatever, the whole key is to get it open and to be able to communicate out that the runway is safe to land on. Then we can start bringing people in to run things. And as the community recovers, we can draw people back. But it's unrealistic to think that we are going to have enough workers at the airport to actually do what we need to do here on our own.
Commissioner Cohen.
Thank you. Thanks, Danelle. Great job. I spent many sleepless nights in my previous job worrying about resiliency. And you'd mentioned the planning effort that was done by the state in 2013 around a Cascadia event. And that's what the state was really focused on. And thank goodness we haven't had the earthquake yet, but two very significant events that we had to deal with. One was an ice storm that shut down a lot of the Willamette Valley and Portland metro area for over a week, including the governor's residents that didn't have power for a week. Sobering for all of us that had thought we'd done all this great planning, and it immediately points out where you have holes in your plan. And then, of course, the Labor Day fires, which were devastating in so many communities. Same challenges with workforce. And so from a planning perspective, what the state focused on, and you're right, Dan, is where you have hubs that you can move material and people. And clearly it's Portland Airport, it's Redmond Airport, it's Medford Airport, Pendleton Airport for Eastern Oregon and Boise, and making sure they're up and running so we can get things in that we're going to need to recover. This is really, really important work, and thank you for your focus on it. The other thing I think we learned at the state level is immediately following an event, everyone is all, what went wrong and how do we prepare better and what kind of resources do you need? And 1 year later, on to the next thing. And so I think getting the resources will be challenging, but it takes that focused effort. And we really don't want to have a significant event to bring people's attention back to the fact that we need resources. That's not the best way to do that. But that behind the scenes work and having these facilities available to help the state's response is going to be absolutely critical. So thank you.
Thank you. Other comments from commission? No questions? Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Stan. All right, now I wanted to ask if any of the commissioners wanted a presentation on the consent item on the agenda, and let me read it for your information. And that is the real estate agreement amendment with the U.S. Department of Energy, Bonneville Power Administration, and Portland International Airport. Is anyone? Okay, not seeing any. I would ask for a motion and a second for approval of the executive director's recommendation. All right. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Fantastic. Motion is carried. All right. And now we knew not to have Stan leave his seat, but let me ask you to introduce our first action item on the agenda.
So you just heard how important our resilience program is, and what we're going to be asking you is equally as important now, and goes to the whole idea of getting funding for a lot of this. So just a few minutes ago, you heard Danelle speak about the importance of the program. And now this item is seeking your approval to adopt the 2023 Multnomah County Multi-Jurisdictional Natural Hazards Mitigation Plan. It's a lot of words. In which the port has, we do have a specific chapter within that plan, and it includes a set of mitigation actions from our resilience program that you just heard about. Adopting the plan will provide the port with a FEMA-approved local mitigation plan, which will provide us a path to directly apply for FEMA mitigation grants so that we can implement actions that are within our plan. Access to these funds increases our ability to build resilience at PDX as well as T6, which are the two critical lifeline facilities in Multnomah County that we just talked about. So now I'm going to turn it over to Alex Howard, who is our Senior Policy Development Manager in our Government Affairs Relations team. And she's going to present the item.
Thank you. Good morning, Commissioners. Thanks for having me here. Try to make this work again. Is this a little bit better? So as Stan said, I'm on our Port Government Affairs team, and I'm here today to provide information on this mouthful of a plan that we're very excited to be a part of. So we're going to talk about what it is, why we're part of it, and we've heard about that. Our drivers are really the ability to access FEMA federal grant funds, which this plan, once approved, will let us do. So that's the big driver here. And then to seek your approval of the executive director's recommendation. So next slide. So what is the Multnomah County Multi-Jurisdictional Natural Hazards Mitigation Plan? So at its core, it's a FEMA local mitigation plan. And a local mitigation plan is a plan that describes the natural hazards in an area, right? So it looks at all of the risks you have. So fire, heat, wildfire, smoke, storms, a variety of things, and looks at the risks that they pose given our social conditions, our economic conditions, and our physical conditions. And then following that, it has a series of actions, mitigation actions, so things that we can do, and all of our partners individually have actions within this plan to do to reduce specific risks in those specific geographies. So these plans are developed locally. So like I said, in this case, with multiple jurisdictions, and they're developed consistent with federal requirements. And they're done in cities and counties across the country, and they are a requirement to access FEMA grants, right? So the other year, we got a congressional allocation to support the Resilient Runway Project. So that had to funnel through FEMA for us to get that funding, and we did an exception because we weren't part of local mitigation plan. So this sets us up to be better able to apply for grants in the future to support all of the work that Danelle just described. So this specific plan was worked on by the county with the county in the lead, and we really appreciate all of their work there. It went to FEMA in August of this year. They approved it. The county then adopted the plan in October. And so now each of the jurisdictions that are part of the plan has the opportunity, like we do right now, to adopt the plan. Once we adopt it, it's effective for us because the plan has been made effective by the counties, by the adoption by the county. So next page, slide. So what do the actions do? I mean, you just heard a ton from Danelle. So it really implements all of the things that are in the resilience program. So the ports chapter is based on all of that work, and it's about us being able to provide those critical lifeline facilities. So it focuses on PDX and T6 because those are the two facilities that will provide various bridges for us out of the region to get aid and then to support recovery. It includes hardening infrastructure such as the runway and the airfield. It includes actions to do power reliability. We've structured the actions in the plan based on the resilience plan to cover everything we could possibly apply for in a grant, right? So it's a menu. It's kind of like if you're familiar with the regional transportation plan, you need to get on the menu so you can ask for money for things. So it covers planning to implementation. So what the resilience program needs, this provides a venue for us to seek that funding. So from the central utility plant to the runway to other options. And it can also support some of our emergency preparedness work. Next slide, please. So who did we talk to when we developed this plan? Really, the port's resilience work, as you heard from Danelle, is the outcome of a series of conversations that we've been having for the past 10, more than a long time with our regional partners. So we worked with all of our regional partners as part of the planning process. As Danelle mentioned, we did the NIB study to understand the cost benefit of the runway. We worked with Portland State University to do that two-part analysis where they looked at the demographics of the workers who would be out of work with the runway closure, and then talk to representative populations done by the School of Social Welfare to understand what the impacts of that closure could look like from a social perspective. And then we've engaged with all of those regional partners that were talked about previously and worked internally to understand concerns and opportunities to put together this work. But again, it really reflects all of the work in the resilience program. And this is really the focus here is to get us into the plan so that we can apply for grants. Next slide, please. And that's the summary. So what's the driver? We want to get financial support for these resilience projects. They're not necessarily fundable through our normal mechanisms, and they cost a lot of money. So we really need some support to do it. And also it increases awareness of what the port's resilience focus and interest is. So we participate with people to say, you know, PDX is here to and T6 to provide critical community lifelines. We mean it. We're committed to being a good community partner. We've done a lot of work around that in the preparedness mode. So we did the vaccination lot here at PDX in the economy lot. That was a huge effort. And that tied together our resilience emergency management work. We sent our firefighters down to Southern Oregon to work on the fires. So this reflects a lot of that role that we see that the port can play in community resilience. So the process, we worked with Multnomah County and super appreciative of their work to do it. We couldn't have done it without them. They set up the whole process. They ran the process. We were able to participate and have our own section, but we're really fortunate that we got into it with them. And so we identified our specific actions based on the program itself that already exists. And so the outcomes of adopting this plan at the port is our ability to directly apply for FEMA grants. That's the main driver. So that, next slide. This is where I ask you to vote on it. So we ask you to approve the executive director's recommendation. So be it resolved that the Port of Portland adopt the 2023 Multnomah County Multi-Jurisdictional Natural Hazards Mitigation Plan, a FEMA local mitigation plan, including the Port of Portland chapter.
Yes, okay, actually several commissioners. Well, we just work our way down the table. Commissioner Luther, Commissioner Nemi, Commissioner Kova.
Yeah, thank you. My questions are just really to educate me a little bit better about the implications for a multi-agency agreement like this. My question relates to, as Multnomah County is sort of the convening agency related to this plan, are there any implications for their governance or oversight as it relates to our request for funds or as the plan is played out? So that's one piece, just in terms of the ongoing role that the county might play vis-a-vis any actions we would seek to be, or choices that we would be making in terms of our own resilience through this plan, but also whether as a part of the process that Multnomah County convened, were there elements of the plan that they were overseeing, or were there elements that were left out as a part of that process? So I'm just trying to understand the implications of how those things come together, or is it just merely, you know, logos on a paper as it's submitted, and each body is operating separately, or whether there's ongoing governance of any kind?
We operate separately. So if we
Okay.
want to apply for actions, our actions are listed in there, and those are the ones that we would apply for. So we don't have to go through anybody else to do the application.
Okay.
This gets us in here.
Okay.
So we can operate independently with it. They set up the structure of it. They did all the analysis of the entire region. And then we're, a small geography within the region. And so we're able to partake in that process. But we can do our actions, Gresham can do their actions, the flood district can do their actions, the county can do theirs.
Okay.
So this really helps us. We each have our own chapter.
Okay.
Right. So we get to use the baseline information together. And then I think that addresses does that also address your process question?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
It's just a matter of ongoing governance. What's the implication of the plan itself, other
Mhm.
than just a mechanism to request for funds?
It's a mechanism to request for funds. It lasts for 5 years. So these plans are updated every 5 years. That clock started in October of this year. We can apply for our actions separately. We don't have to go through anybody else to get them done. If we want to participate again in 5 years, we would want to be part of the process. But then if we don't, then we won't be part of the plan. So we're pretty independent. Also, there's no financial obligation with this. This is a list of things that we would like to do, and ideally we will do them, but we are not obligated to do them.
Commissioner Nemi?
Thank you. I'm just curious. I don't see the city of Portland on the entities that are a part of this, and so and obviously we're in the city of Portland, so curious about that.
We are. The city of Portland has their own plan. They have their own natural hazard mitigation plan, and the planning cycle just worked out. They had already done their plan, and we're calling around to see who could we do the plan with. And Multnomah County was just starting their process. The city had already adopted their plan, so it was just a window of which one we wanted to be a part of. And either one is great. And Multnomah County, one of the benefits is that they've done a multi-jurisdictional plan continuously, right? So in the last plan, you have all of those partners except for the flood districts and the port who just joined this year. So they were already set up structurally to really bring everyone together in a partnership. So it was good timing for us. So the city has its own separate plan. We all talk to each other through the Regional Disaster Preparedness Organization and have supporting actions. So I know that the city is aware of the runway and is supportive of our work around the runway and other objectives as well.
All right, fine. Any other questions or comments from commission? All right, hearing none, I would ask for a motion to approve and to second the executive director's recommendation. Did we note both of those, Pam? Fantastic. All right. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion carries very much. All right, Dan, let me call on you to introduce our last agenda item.
Come on down, Marcel. Commissioners, this item is a request to approve a public improvement contract to construct the Basin 6 Regional Stormwater Facility here at Portland International Airport. Really, the goal of this project is to increase our capacity to handle stormwater for future development. It's really born out of a 2015 stormwater master plan that we have for the airport. And we've already accomplished a couple projects in our master plan, and this is the next one in sequence. Here to introduce the topic and ask for your approval is Marcel Hermans, Engineering Project Manager.
Thank you, Dan, and good morning, commissioners. Next slide, please. Yeah, stands that I'm here to request your approval to award a construction contract to MJ Hughes for the Basin 6 Regional Stormwater Facility project in the listed amount of $2,242,900. Next slide, please. Stormwater Basin 6 includes the central portion of the PDX airfield, including the PDX terminal building and the short-term parking garage, P1, shown on this slide. Under the port's stormwater permit, the port is required to provide stormwater treatment for any new developments at PDX. For reasons of overall efficiency and timing, the port previously decided to proactively construct treatment capacity ahead of certain new developments. The expansion of Basin 6 Regional Stormwater Facility is one of such projects. The provided treatment for this basin consists of managing the retention time in existing ponds that are also used for managing the ISM system flows, specifically the East Quiescent Basin and East Detention Basin, EQB and EDB. Currently, all runoff from Drainage Basin 6 flows into the EQB, which provides for initial settlement opportunity. From the EQB, water then flows into the EDB, which allows for further settlement of finer particles. Depending on the de-icing season and situation, water can then either be discharged to the Columbia Slough or pumped through Pump Station 6 to the Lutz storage tanks with ultimate discharge to the Columbia River. Next slide, please. The work of this construction contract includes the construction of a new sheet pile wall that will separate the East Detention Basin into an upper and lower section, as well as valves, sensors, and controls to manage the flows between the basins. It also includes installation of bird netting over the upper EDB and clean out and disposal of sediments from the ponds. Next slide, please. Planning and design started in the second half of 2021, followed by engineering design earlier this year. And assuming your approval today, construction is anticipated to start in June and be completed in October. Next slide, please. The contract amount of about 2.2 million is part of a total project budget of 4.75 million, as shown here. Based on an availability analysis, the small business enterprise participation goal for this contract was set at 11.5%. MJ Hughes is a certified small business firm, and their bid has a participation level of 40.3%. Next slide, please. And with that, we recommend that approval be given to award this construction contract to MJ Hughes for the amount shown on this slide.
Questions or comments from Commission? Please.
I just have one question. Thank you, by the way. Is it safe to assume that the discharge into the Columbia Slough, there's regular testing for any of the water discharge into the Columbia Slough, or could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, that is a part of the standard program.
Okay.
And yeah, the system itself manages stormwater, but depending on the de-icing situation, that can be diverted. So if we're in the de-icing season, there's also testing for remnants of some of the de-icing chemicals. And in that case, it would be diverted. But either way, there's monitoring of the stormwater.
And how frequent is that?
How frequent is that? I do not know, but maybe, oh, she left. Then I'll use to run that program, yeah.
All right, that's fine. Thank you, Spirit. Thank you.
Sure.
Maybe I could just add that it certainly DEQ sets the standard for us for when and how often we have to monitor. And I know when we go to de-icing operations, we monitor more frequently because that material has to be diverted and treated and then tested again before it's discharged. So it's really set by the regulatory standard.
Yeah, and it's certainly several times a year, but beyond that, I don't know the exact frequency.
Are there other questions or comments from Commission? I had one. I saw that the small business target was set at 11.5 and the bid was 40, which is, I mean, it's wonderful to see that kind of expansion. Will they be evaluated against 11.5 or the 40% set aside that they've identified?
Against the 40.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
All right. Are there other questions or comments? If not, I would entertain a motion for approval of the recommendation. All right. No further comment. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. 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 Opposed? All right. With that, Before we leave, Stan, we won't see you again doing this, but happy trails. All right, and with that, we are adjourned.